Hi everyone, this is Robert and welcome to IDG Live. Today we are looking at, Aegon the Fourth, Aegon the Unworthy. I will get into that in just 1 minute. If you are a patron of this channel, if you're considering becoming a patron of this channel, I've got exciting news, something to do with this shirt that I'm wearing right now that I will show you in all its glory a little bit later. But let's just get straight into talking about Aegon the Fourth first. Aegon the Fourth is often called Aegon the Unworthy. He's generally up there as one of the top bad kings of Westeros. And so what I'm hoping is that as we're working through this today, we can come to some kind of an understanding about why. Why is it look at him and think of him as the worst, as the king that's beyond even people. Often people say he's even worse than Maegor the Cruel. So let's take a look at him. Aegon IV was born in the year 135 after the conquest, which is 4 years after the end of the Dance of the Dragons. So if we're kind of trying to place him in a timeline, we have to first of all remember that although we've looked at a few kings after the Dance of the Dragons, he's only one generation down. Still, we've been moving up and down generations for a while. Aegon II, Aegon III were the same generation. Then we went down one generation. We had Daemon I. Then we had Baelor. Then we went back up a generation. Viserys II was that same generation as his brother, Aegon III. So when we come back down again to Aegon IV, we've only actually moved on one generation, which makes Aegon IV the last Targaryen king to have seen a dragon, which is psychologically, I think, quite important. From after him onwards, everyone's trying to recapture the great old days. He was the first king who was brought up thinking that he would be riding a dragon, the last Targaryen king to be brought up thinking he would be riding a dragon. He saw morning being ridden over King's Landing as he was a child. He had a dragon egg placed in his cradle thinking that he would be just bonding with this dragon as he grew older. It was only as he grew up that this sense that the dragons had gone kind of dissipated. So he, although we've had various kings who've tried to be adapting to how to be a king, a Targaryen king without dragons, he's the last one who still had this idea of dragons that he could still cling to. We'll come back later to what that might have meant in terms of how he tried to do dragons, because each of his predecessors, let's not forget, did try to do dragons in one way or another, whether that's trying to bring them back, hatch some dragon eggs, whether that's trying to be saying, I am the dragon, whether that's saying, okay, we're not doing dragons anymore, we're embracing the Faith of the Seven. We'll look a little bit later about what Aegon IV did about that. But he grew up not thinking that he would be king. He was actually fourth in line to the throne when he was growing up. He was the first son of a second son. Aegon III had two sons who were before him in the line of succession, Daemon and then Baelor. And so he will have watched his uncle, Aegon III, rule for quite a while. And then after him, his first son, Daemon, rule for a while, but die young without children. And then Baelor took over. And at some point in this process, he will have started to think, surely, hang on a moment, Daemon didn't have any children. Baelor doesn't look like he's going to be having any children. Who inherits after Baelor? Well, surely my dad does. Who inherits after my dad? Then surely me. So at some point, as he is growing up, this thought will have crossed his mind that he actually is going to be the king, but not when he was young. So when he was young, he grew up as a Targaryen prince. And happy and without many responsibilities. But already when he's still quite young, we start to see a few of the character traits that would be going there through his life. He got a mistress quite early on, and he got a mistress pregnant, and he also got a child from that mistress. However, he was already married. He'd been married relatively early on to his sister Nerys. Now, this is not a marriage of love. This was a marriage where his father thought, we need to keep the Targaryens together. It's a political marriage. And again, this is something we will pick up later, but all of the hints that we get are that Nerys actually was in love with the other brother, Aemon, who became known as Aemon the Dragon Knight. They were both of similar temperament. They were quite holy in a way. They were very proud, but also quite humble. They were Aemon was quite a legend in his own lifetime, the greatest fighter of his lifetime. Now, what this meant was that Aegon, having married his sister, he never really seemed to find any joy in that marriage. So, although he did indeed have children from there, it didn't work. He had two children. He had a son and a daughter, Daeron, who became Daeron II, and Daenerys. Daenerys, who married into the Martell family, and this was what brought about, much later, what brought about the Dornish people, the Martells, becoming a part of the Seven Kingdoms. But he never seemed to find any happiness in his marriage. And so his roving eye kept on roving. And over his lifetime, he had 9 mistresses. Now, this wasn't just a matter of, here's the queen beside me, and secretly over there I have a mistress. He was quite brazen about this. He was quite open about this. Everybody knew that, he might sleep with his wife every now and then, but generally speaking, she wasn't in power, and he would bring to power alongside him his mistress. And he had 9 of these mistresses, one after the other, who would effectively sit next to him in court, be his queen in all but name. And these varied greatly as to who they were. There were noble women of Westeros, also a couple from Essos. The second of these 9 we read about was when his cousin Daeron I took and invaded and conquered Dorne. If you may remember a few weeks back when we were looking at that, one of the parts of the treaty was that the Dornish nobles gave up some of their sons and daughters to go up effectively as hostages to King's Landing. And the person who was given charge of taking these hostages back to King's Landing from Dorne was Aegon, a younger Aegon. And one of them he made his mistress. And that's the kind of story that we have going on again and again through his life. He would happen to meet a woman, and then if he liked her, she became his mistress. There was a black pearl of Bravos. There were 2 Brackens. There was a Blackwood, Melissa Blackwood. He would have a mistress for a few years and then move on to the next one. So that's the kind of impression we get of him, which on one level you might start to say, okay, so, he had a weakness. But that's kind of underplaying it to just say he had a weakness, because this inability to control his own impulses was what completely dominated all of his rule. So, first of all, Daemon, his cousin, died. Baelor, his other cousin, took over. Baelor then also died. The next king was Viserys II, his father, Aegon's father. There were rumors at the time when Viserys died, suspiciously quickly. When he died, after only a year being king, there were some people who did get a little bit suspicious of that perhaps Aegon IV might have hurried that death along a bit. We don't have any evidence either way on this. But what we do know is that he inherited relatively late in terms of sort of when the Targaryens often inherit. He was 37. So he had spent a lot of his life not thinking he was going to be king. And then slowly but surely he will have started thinking, okay, I will be king. And then his father took over. And perhaps this is the kind of the train of thought we have to go down is perhaps he thought, but my father's quite healthy and my father's probably going to live for another 10, 20, 30 years. Will I become king? Well, I'm still a young man. Perhaps not. That's what a lot of people thought. Anyway, Viserys II died rather suspiciously, and Aegon IV took over. His rule was one of general peace, it has to be said. There weren't many overseas or even internal kind of ructions. There were no massive wars. And that seemed to give him license to be just enjoying being king. There are many kind of echoes of King Henry VIII here. We'll talk about that again a little bit later. But he just had a court that he would reward the people he liked and just get rid of the people he didn't like. It was corrupt. It was the kind of thing that you would look at to say he just willfully neglected the Seven Kingdoms. His father, for many years, both as king and before that as Hand of the King, had ruled trying to put the needs of the Seven Kingdoms first. Aegon IV seems not to have cared about that in the slightest. The one thing that did, however, start to dominate was this thought about who's his heir, because he had these 9 mistresses and they had many bastard children from him, and he recognized a lot of them, and many of them he didn't, but from his 9 official mistresses he did seem to recognize the children from there. He had 13 children from those 9 mistresses, and he recognized them, and it very soon became apparent that one of them was becoming his favorite. One of them who was not actually from one of his 9 mistresses, but from a cousin of his, who had been in the Maiden Vault. This had been the cause, you may remember, thinking back to Baelor, when Baelor went on that hunger strike, this when he's racked with this great moral problem of the fact that one of his sisters, Dana, had been had become pregnant, despite the fact that he'd locked her in the Maiden Vault. And what was he going to do? Woe is me. She had become pregnant, and the father was Aegon. And the son that emerged from that was Daemon, who became known as Daemon Blackfyre. He was Daemon Rivers to start with, became known as Daemon Blackfyre. Now, this person, who we will look at in detail next time, we will look at Daemon Blackfyre as a whole live stream next time, but he grew up and he was great. He was just a epitome of what a prince should be. He was a great fighter. He was charming. He was charismatic. He was everything you could possibly want. He was knighted, the youngest knight ever in the Seven Kingdoms by Aegon IV. And Aegon IV dramatically gave him the sword Blackfyre. This is significant. The sword of Blackfyre is the ancestral sword of the Targaryen kings. This was the sword that Aegon the Conqueror had had. This is the sword that Maegor the Cruel had had. This is the sword that Charis had had. This is the sword that Viserys had taken on. You saw it there in House of the Dragon. Aegon II had it to try and prove his legitimacy. It got passed on down, effectively all the way down to Daemon I. Daemon I used it when he was conquering Dawn. This is the sword that is carried by Targaryen kings. And Aegon IV gave it to his bastard son. What does this mean? Well, everyone was like, are you saying he's like the king now? He's next in line? Aegon never said that. And at no point in his life did he ever say, Daemon is my heir. Which is where the problems start, because his named heir all the way through his life was his firstborn legitimate son, Daemon II. But Daemon was never given Blackfyre, which was the sword of the king. So people going, why are you giving the sword of the kings to one of your other children if you don't want Daemon? If you want Daemon to be king, then you should give Daemon your sword, even if he's not a great swordsman. So this really confused people, and this problem grew and grew and grew. And during this time, Aegon's health got worse and worse and worse. And when I say his health got worse and worse and worse, he could not control his impulses, by which I mean not just around women, around food too. He would eat and he would eat and he would eat. And he started off quite a fit young man, but he grew fatter and fatter and unhealthier until towards the end of his reign, we're told that he was lying on a sofa effectively and he could not get up. And that was it. That was where he lived from there on. And we even get, in the World of Ice and Fire, we even get some really quite gruesome details that this isn't just, an obesely overweight person. Through his legs were so thick and unwell that, worms would start to be burrowing their way into them. This was horrific stuff. The extent to which the priests of the Seven would start saying, well, this is the judgment of the gods. Remember, the last king was great and godly, but this guy, no. So his reign descended and descended and descended. But as he became more and more sedentary, then the people would start to divide themselves more. Some people could just leave him alone and just say, okay, so he's just that kind of king. It's easiest to stay away from him because maybe we'll get rewarded, maybe we'll get punished. It's easiest just to stay away. But some people saw their chance to curry favor. Some people saw their chance to throw their weight behind one of the two possible successors, Daemon or Daemon. And as this process continued, increasingly we got Aegon IV starting to show that he preferred Daemon, but not able to say it. He said, I want to invade Dawn. Now, fine. Daemon I had wanted to invade Dawn. But the difference now was that his son, Daemon, who would become Daemon II, was actually married to Dornish princess. So invading Dorne was actually invading your own family. And Daemon was completely against this. Aegon didn't care. He said, this time we'll do it via the water. We're going to build a massive fleet. And then we'll send an army over the land to meet them. And the two problems happened. The first problem was, because he got his way, he was the king. The first problem was that the fleet, he built the fleet, he sent it out to sail, and then it had there was a massive storm, and the fleet was destroyed. The second problem was that he had decided that what he wanted to do with his army was he wanted dragons, but not just he didn't have any real dragons, obviously, anymore. So he basically said, let's build me some. Think a little bit steampunk here. That's the kind of idea we've got. He went to the pyromancers and said, make me some dragons. You've got wildfire. Let's just make some out of, what have you got? Wood, steel. Build me some dragons, and then we can do wildfire out of the mouth. It's going to be amazing. And the pyromancers seem to have gone, okay. And so they built some steampunk dragons, and then started wielding them towards Dawn. But they never made it to Dawn. Trying to get through the Boneway, which is the mountain pass through there. Some parts are so tricky, it's steps, really quite hard steps to get up. The idea of heaving a massive steel and wooden dragon up there was hard enough already. But most of these dragons didn't make it all even that far. They got as far as the Kingswood, which is literally just south of King's Landing, and then something went wrong. We're told that thousands of men died. A quarter of the entire forest got burnt down. It was a disaster. And Aegon was basically forced to admit defeat. And he went, okay, well, I won't invade Dawn then. Whatever. Let's have a party instead. That was how he worked. His prolificity was so great that he would go to places while he still could and he'd give away effectively the family jewels. He would give away huge amounts of largesse and treasures to people that pleased him. People who did not, he would just take all of their lands, take all of their money. No questions asked. He was the king. That's what he would do. And we have the best example of the giving people great treasures is, if you remember in Duncan Egg, the third Duncan Egg story, when we get the Mystery Knight, and this is a jousting contest, a tourney at a place called White Walls, which is a random mid-sized castle. And the prize there was a dragon egg. And then we know that dragon eggs are hugely expensive. So it's like, why is there a dragon egg there? Why is that the prize? And it turns out what had happened just a generation before, because it's about a generation or so before Aegon V. Aegon IV had visited there, and the Lord had given up his 3 daughters for the night to Aegon IV. Whether he'd wanted to or not, we're not told. And apparently all 3 of them became pregnant. And to thank his host, to celebrate, then Aegon IV gave him a dragon egg. And that's why at White Walls there was a dragon egg. That was the kind of king that Aegon IV was. So you can probably imagine where all this ends. Aegon IV was a king who divided the people. A lot of the people just tried to ignore him and stay out of his way, to be honest. But the court started to settle into 2 different camps. One camp was the camp surrounding his firstborn official son, Deeren, and another camp was surrounding his bastard son, Daemon, who he'd given the sword Blackfyre to. And there's already starting to get the feeling of a succession crisis about this. And maybe Aegon could have tried to solve this. Maybe he could have tried to stop this. Maybe he could have said, actually, you know what? This person here is my heir. He never, to give him his due, he never gave up on the idea. He never turned down the idea that Deeren was his heir, but he also never said, Daemon is not my heir. And on his deathbed, he had one last trick, one last bit of fun, one last hand grenade to be thrown into the politics of Westeros, which was to legitimize all of his bastard children, all of them. And he just said, every single bastard child I had, and he seems to have named as many as he could remember, all of them are now legitimate. They are not just, I'm not just acknowledging them, I'm not just saying, yeah, they're mine. They're now in the line of succession after Deeren. So Deeren was always, right up to the last, the official heir, and then Daemon came next as the oldest, newly official legitimized heir. At which point Aegon IV died. And what will follow quite soon afterwards is the Blackfyre Rebellion, because Daemon, his illegitimate son, who he then legitimized, took on the name, the surname. He had been Daemon Rivers. He took on the surname of the sword that he'd been given, Daemon Blackfyre. And we get the Blackfyre Rebellions all flowing from that. So that's sort of an overview of the rule of Aegon IV. He is generally known as Aegon the Unworthy, looking back on him. And the unworthiness is not so much just he was in the same way that maybe we would look at Maegor and say he was cruel. It's not so much we'd look at someone like Aenys and say, well, he was just inept. When people look at Aegon IV, we're not saying that he was stupid. He knew what was. He just willfully did not curb any of his impulses, and he willfully allowed the kingdom, which was in a relatively safe and prosperous space, to just charge towards a place of open rebellion. And during his rule, his unworthiness was there in the small acts, the choosing who the winners are based on can I sleep with your daughter, based on who's going to come up and to give me the greatest pleasure and the most fun, serve the best feast. They are going to get rewarded. People who don't do those things are not. They're going to get ignored. So that is why we think of him as Aegon the Unworthy. Not necessarily the nastiest of kings, but certainly one of the kings who left the kingdom in a much worse state because of their rule. Maura Lee saying, just a show of love and appreciation for all the content, stories, merch, and the special care you give to all the mods and patrons of the channel, of which I'm one. You are a blessing. Thank you. Hugs to Dan the dog. Well, thank you, Maura. Thank you. You know how much I appreciate your support, and also thank you for your super sticker. Michelle Rimo saying, stop. If that shirt says what I think it says, I need it now. Well, I'll show you the shirt properly in a moment. And what else have we got going on? Lucas Njassen saying, thank you, Robert, from Sweden, for all your work. You fill my days with joy. Well, thank you very much, Lucas. I hugely appreciate that. Have I got any more questions? I'm just quickly flicking through the chat, see if I've got any more questions. If not, I will just try and give you a quick sneak peek. Okay, let's have a quick look at that, if you can. When in doubt, blame Bloodraven. And yes, you are right. This is the long-awaited and long-promised shirt that if you've been watching this channel for a while, you know that this is something that I've been promising people for 2, maybe even 3 years. A shirt that, when in doubt, blame Bloodraven. Finally, it is here, and it is indeed artwork by the fabulous Sanrixian, who, if you've not come across, then is a wonderful artist. I'm sure if you're watching this live, people in the moderators in the chat will put some links up to Sanrixian's work. So yes, this is a Sanrixian original and exclusive for Deep Geek, and it is available now from my Spreadshirt shop, which you can find a link to down in the description. And more importantly, this is a thank you to my patrons and my moderators, incidentally. If you are a $10 or more patron, then go on to Patreon, send me a message, let me know an address, and I will send you one of these out just as a thank you. I mean it when I say that I hugely appreciate the support that I get from my patrons, and so this is just a small thank you. If you want it in a mug or something else rather than a shirt, just let me know. That's absolutely fine. We can do that as well. Moderators, similarly, just let me know some details, and I will send you a shirt as well as an expression of my care and thanks to you. And if you want a shirt, you can either buy one. If you're not a patron, you can either buy one, or if you wish to join my Patreon at the $10 or more level, then you can have one for free. I will send one out as long as you do it by the end of this month. That'll be the cut-off by the end of June of this year. So, as a thank you to patrons, this is just something I've been promising for a long time. Let me know if you want this. Genuinely, the cheapest way is to become a patron, and give me your details, and I will send you a shirt as well. Okay, Sundowners Club. Thank you very much for the super chat saying, love the discussion on Aegon the Unworthy. We started our channel about 8 months ago and cover A Song of Ice and Fire, and really love the community. You need to come on soon to one of our live streams to talk A Song of Ice and Fire. Well, thank you. That's very kind of you. I will check out your channel. And always great to welcome people into the wider Song of Ice and Fire and Lord of the Rings communities. Always happy to support new creators. Talking of which, if you have come across, I haven't watched new YouTube channels or listened to new podcasts for quite some time. If there are some new, and I'm absolutely sure there must be, there's some new excellent channels out there, just let me know. I would, in the comments below afterwards, I would love to know what they are, and just sort of help spread the love a little bit. So welcome, Sundowners Club. Great to see you. Oh, lots of love in the chat for the shirt. I'm delighted to hear that. And Vikisk, thank you very much for some very kind words, saying the highlight of your week. Delighted, and you started reading A Song of Ice and Fire thanks to me. That means a lot. Thank you. Akutosh Ray saying, love the shirt. Does it shipping to the US? Yeah, absolutely. I can definitely over to the US. There's a Spreadshirt shop for Europe and the US, and we can get it worldwide if you want. So let's go to question from one of my patrons. Let's pick up on Ty Farnsworth. says, hey, Robert, what in Aegon's upbringing would have led to his recklessness as a prince and king? It seems we often see reckless rulers raised in times of peace, whereas more responsible rulers inherit during times of war and crisis. Do you think George R. R. Martin was going for the old good times create weak men trope, or is there a completely separate motivation behind Aegon's actions? Well, I mean, the trope... if you'll excuse the sort of gendered language, is good times create weak men create hard times create strong men, and then strong men create good times, and it's a kind of a loop. Is George R. R. Martin buying into that? To a degree, yes, because there's a bit of truth to that, I suspect. But he also definitely shows us weak rulers in good times and weak rulers in hard times and strong rulers in good times. So Aenys is probably a good example of a weak ruler during hard times. He did not rise to the challenge. And then you get someone like Aerys II, the Mad King, who ruled in... Actually, they were probably quite easy times, and he just ruled badly. So I think I would give George R. R. Martin the credit here and say that he doesn't just buy into a trope. I think one of the kind of the psychological things that he's kind of hinting at, which is what I was trying to play up when I was giving that background there, is that Aegon did not grow up thinking he would be king. That's important because, as we've seen both in fantasy worlds and also our own, if you grow up thinking that you're going to have to be the firstborn who has to have all of these bits of responsibility on you, then perhaps that makes you more serious. That perhaps sharpens the mind, makes you more focused. Whereas often, typically, the second-born, those who grow up with great privilege, but maybe not so much responsibility, they're a lot more free. They're a lot more able to express themselves. They the expectations upon them are so much lower that they can go off and do what they want. And this certainly seems to be the way that this plays, is that during his early years, into his teenage years, probably even into his 20s, he didn't think that he was going to be king. He thought that he would be a prince of the realm. He thought that he would be someone who would have lots of money, he would have access to everything he ever wanted, but he wouldn't have to worry about this boring and messy business of ruling. And it's only, one suspects, when he got into his late 20s or maybe even early 30s that he started to think, well, maybe I will be king. maybe I will. And that I suspect kind of shaped him, is that he was already had a certain personality, but then he just gone, okay, so how do I do this? Well, I'll just carry on as I was, but just with more power. It's interesting, we don't hear about his, I mean, we have one mention of a Hand of the King when he was there, but even that seems to have been that was a Bracken. That was Lord Bracken, and Lord Bracken became king because his daughter became the mistress of Aegon the Fourth, and this doesn't seem to be like well thought out. Oh, I think I'll have somebody run the Seven Kingdoms. Well, it's like, here's just a job I can hand out to people who please me. So that doesn't seem to have been actually governing doesn't seem to have been a thing which bothered us in huge amounts. Ranabir Mitra saying, "Evening, Robert. I hope you're well. Do you believe that Aegon, Dana, and Daemon Daenerys are stories of parallel lives of lost lovers? GGMU and What Love. Good hashtags. Love both of them. So Aegon and Dana and Daemon and Daenerys. Well, let's talk about Aegon and Dana first. So Aegon and Dana was the woman who was a sister, his cousin, and a sister of Baelor, who Baelor had put into the Maiden Vault, basically locked up because he thought he didn't want them to be falling into disrepute, and he didn't want anyone else tempted by their great beauty. However, she on at least 3 occasions managed to escape this, and on one of them she met up with Aegon, and then she had his child who became Daemon. Is that a love story? No, it's not. He moved on. He didn't when she emerged from the Maiden Vault. He didn't immediately even take her as a lover. That was okay. I've got a child. That's it. He'd moved on. So they weren't lovers. As for Daemon and Daenerys, so Daemon, when we're talking about Daemon and Daenerys, this is obviously going back up to sort of House of the Dragon, Dance of the Dragons times. Is that a love story for the ages? They've certainly turned it more into it in House of the Dragon. If you read the pages of Fire and Blood, having not seen House of the Dragon, then it's hard not to see this as slightly predatory behavior by Daemon. And when I say slightly, very. It's not, I would say, the same. Are they in love? Yes. I mean, I would say that when you get Daemon, actually, you said with Daenerys, or I was assuming you meant Rhaenyra. Apologies if I've misinterpreted, but I would say yes, there was love there, but I wouldn't say that that's the same beating heart love story that we get presented on the TV screen. Let's go to a question from Reflective Rambling, saying Mark Shiso, picking up a question from Mark Shiso. Thank you very much. Love it when people do that. Thank you there, Reflective. Saying, did Aegon IV have a hand of the king, or probably more than one, and what were they doing? Well, I sort of touched on this just one moment ago. We don't know the details, is the short answer. We only really hear about the one, who is Lord Bracken. Lord Bracken does not really come out well from what we have. So one daughter of his becomes the mistress of Aegon IV, and mistress for a while. And this kind of plays out, I suspect, when we get Fire and Blood Part 2, we'll get a lot more about this. This seems to be a big part of the kind of the Bracken Blackwood rivalry, because we had a Bracken mistress, and then we had Melissa Blackwood, and then a bit later we had another Bracken mistress, and the Aegon IV was like naming and renaming the disputed hills between the two lands. But Lord Bracken, having had one daughter become queen, had effectively queen, the favoured mistress, who'd then fallen out of favour, he then trained his other younger daughter to be perfect. Aegon IV. He'd learned now. He knew what it was that Aegon IV wanted. He trained his daughter now, and sure enough, invited Aegon IV up, and kind of like pushed the other daughter there. She became another mistress. But when she fell out of favour, then finally that was it, and he was gone. So, yes, we did have Hands of the King, but no, they weren't. They don't seem to have been appointed to be running things. They seem to be, as seems to have been the case with most of what was going on with Aegon IV. He was just handing out things as favors. He was handing out jobs here, jobs for the boys, jobs for the people who give me stuff that I want. Luke Campbell, thank you very much for that comment there. Callie Summers saying, why would Aegon IV have wanted to off Viserys at all? He didn't really need more power to indulge his vices than being a prince. Yeah, I mean, it's a valid point. This is always, I mean, it's disputed. It's not ever presented in the world of Vice of Horror anywhere else as being definitely that's what he did. Viserys died unexpectedly. He was getting on a bit, but he wasn't really old, and he seemed to be relatively healthy. And then he only lived for 1 year. He seemed to have an agenda for government. Quite good governance seemed to be what he was about. And then he just suddenly died, and Aegon took over. So that's why people suddenly got a little bit suspicious. It's possible that sometimes people just tragically die. So yeah, I entirely understand the logic that why would Aegon have wanted to? He could be the heir apparent, he could be prince of the realm and it not be an issue. He could have everything he wanted. But maybe he wanted to be king. Maybe he knew, I mean, Viserys, we were looking at him last week. He doesn't strike me, it doesn't strike many people, I suspect, as the kind of person who would indulge his son for the sake of the Seven Kingdoms. He was very, yes, he allowed all of the kings that he was handed the king for to be doing their thing, but you always got the sense that he was guiding the Seven Kingdoms behind their backs. He was doing the things that he wanted to do. And I suspect Aegon didn't want that. He didn't want anybody to be behind the scenes running things. He just wanted to do what he wanted. So, I mean, I'm in two minds. I don't think we've got the evidence either way to suggest that he definitely did or he definitely didn't. He might have done is enough, and that tells us a little bit about the character. The fact that people could believe it tells us a bit about the character of Aegon IV, that nobody seems to come out and said, no, he wouldn't do something like that. He loved his father. That wasn't the kind of thing that came out here. So Aegon IV may have murdered his father. Andrew Kay saying, to me, that deliberate misrule, debauchery, and repeated corruption is what puts Aegon IV at the top of the worst list for me. So, yeah, this is the thing that, and it says it in The World of Ice and Fire as well, is that this is why a lot of people rate him so poorly. It's not that he himself was as bad as Maegor the Cruel. I mean, he doesn't. There are a few moments he seems to have been a bit cruel, but generally speaking, he seems to have just been wanting to live his own best life and not care. And it's the lack of care that's there. It's the deliberate leaving things and not worrying about them and saying, okay, well, I will pass over that person. I will just do this because I want to. It's just that he was in charge of the realm and he just didn't care about the realm. He just wanted to do what he wanted to do. There were, I suspect, when we're talking about the unworthy, there does have a pious element to it as a moniker, somebody, and we should look at him in the light of the fact that his predecessor was Babel, and it's likely that the unworthy thing came from the Maesters as much as anything else. So that's probably it. But yeah, in terms of willfully ignoring what's best for the kingdom, he was right up there. Let's go to a question from 444, saying, in George R. R. Martin's works, there are many examples of siblings who are totally different from each other. But the case of Aegon, Aemon, and Nerys is one of the most drastic ones. Do you think this was an unhappy love triangle where Nerys and Aemon wanted to be together but couldn't? I mean, this is the thing that's hinted at all the way through, is that Aemon the Dragon Knight and Nerys were in love. And Viserys, probably one of the few big mistakes he made in ruling, was to put Aegon and Nerys together. Aemon became a member of the Kingsguard. Perhaps, if I can't have the woman I love, then I will have no woman. Perhaps it was a bit like that. We don't know. What we do know is that back in the days when George R. R. Martin was answering questions, when he went to conventions and people would ask him about plot details, and he actually gave answers. These days, if you do catch him, he very rarely does it these days, but if you do catch him at some kind of Q&A event, then it's very hard to get any new information out of him, because it's just, if you ask him something too direct, and it's just keep on reading. But back in the day, he did, and he was asked some question related to this, and he actually gave quite a detailed answer. So I'll read out what he says. This is from So Spake Martin, which is fantastic. If you ever want to sort of Google what it is and find out what George R. Martin has said on a range of subjects, just go and Google So Spake Martin and you will find it. This is what George R. R. Martin said about this situation. Despite Daemon and Daenerys being in love, her brother the king, Daeron the Good, was more concerned with matters of state than matters of love. There had been many years of fighting with Dawn, and the failure to bring them into the Seven Kingdoms, while not being able to keep them from harassing the Seven Kingdoms. So he realized that where violence failed, perhaps marriage could bring an end to hostilities. And so he uses his sister make an alliance with the Prince of Dawn. It's a political marriage, pure and simple, a convenient marriage to guarantee the union between Dawn and the Seven Kingdoms. And also, he prefers to give his sister to the Prince of Dawn over a bastard brother with whom he'd already had a few clashes, and whom too many people were looking on as a legitimate claimant to the throne or rightful king. That was the straw that broke the camel's back and helps lead to Daemon becoming the first Blackfyre pretender. So we've got a situation here where we've got Daemon Daenerys. This actually picks up a question, one of the super chats earlier about Daemon Daenerys. I think probably this is what you were talking about. We've got a situation where George R. R. Martin has confirmed that there was a love triangle going on there. That, I think, does, to come back to your question, 444, echo what is happening here with Aegon, Aemon, and Nerys. Viserys married Nerys and Aegon because he thought this was good for the realm. He thought it was the right thing to do. He had to keep the family together in this weird Targaryen way that they have, and so the eldest born son has to marry the eldest born daughter, despite the fact that probably Aemon and Nerys were in love. It is an unhappy love triangle. Perhaps when we get Fire and Blood, we'll learn a little bit more, but that is definitely where George R. R. Martin is going with this, and he echoes this down a couple of different generations with this same kind of story. Forced marriage, and we see this again actually several times in the Targaryen rule, forced marriage between siblings where they're actually in love with somebody else, and it never has good end results. Let's have a quick flick through the chat. Effective Rambling saying, once upon a time he did have a cloak. He dug it out for one sub reward. Yeah, I did. I had a cloak with the hood, which is still there, still in my cupboard. Maybe I will bring it out again one day. Let's go to a question from Michelle Ramos saying, or maybe Ramo. Apologies, I'm not entirely sure. Callie Sam saying, is it me or is it getting glitchy audio and video? My laptop has been a bit rubbish today, so apologies if you are getting poor quality. It may well be at my end. Michelle Ramos saying, greetings, Robert. Aegon the Unworthy is a total chaos monster. My question is, do you think legitimizing his bastards on his deathbed was his way of causing as much chaos as possible for Daemon, since he hated Daemon, was rebellion against him what he wanted? I have a hard time believing he legitimized his bastards out of the goodness of his heart. And Andrew Roberts says, why did Aegon decide to legitimize his bastards? What was the purpose? Getting back at Naelys, hatred of Daemon, wanted to cause as much chaos as possible? Well, I mean, this is a great unanswered question. Why did he do it? This was his last. Everyone agrees. Everyone knows this was the last thing that he did. Legitimized all of his children. Now, this was all. So this is the first clue we have that this was legitimizing all of his children, which means it's not just Daemon. So it's not just a matter of getting at Daemon, his son, who, to add an extra layer to what we've been talking about already, from the start there had been rumors that Daemon was not Aegon's son, but maybe Aemon and Naelys had got together, their forbidden love. His brother and his sister had got together, and maybe that Daemon was their son. He just couldn't prove it. And later on, as he was getting older, then Aegon increasingly started to voice these concerns, but never enough to actually delegitimize Daemon. Daemon was always there. So why did he do it? Why did he legitimize all of his bastard children on his deathbed? Was it just to cause chaos? Well, I don't think he was wanting to cause chaos. I don't think that was the driver here. I never get the impression it's just like he's not the kind of character like Littlefinger where he's going, how do I cause the most chaos around? That's not what he's about. He's already got all the power. He doesn't need to get more power. He doesn't need more chaos. He doesn't seem to enjoy chaos. He just seems to do what he wants to do at any given moment in time. And then when he'd had enough with that, he would cast it aside. I think that for all of the overthinking about why did he give his sword to Daemon instead of Daemon, why did he legitimize his sword, I think it's just what felt right at the time. I think that is what seems to suit his character, is that he was just, okay, I'm on my deathbed, what's the thing I want to do? And I've got all these children. I do care about these children. Yeah, I should legitimize them. And I suspect he did not think about the political implications of what he was doing. That doesn't seem to be as a king, he doesn't seem to care huge amounts about the political implications of what he was doing. He seems to care about himself. He seems to care about what he enjoys. I don't see a reason why on his deathbed he would suddenly change that. We're not told that he called upon a priest and said, Father, I have been terrible. I have to pay penance for all of my sins. What's the best thing for me to... No, he doesn't go through that process. He seems to be the same person all the way through to the very end. And so I think we should apply the same principles, that what is driving him here, what feels right at the time. What feels right at the time is that he was going to legitimize all of his children. Okay. Question from Charis Ballerina, picking up for Dagon Tranos, saying, greetings, Robert. What was the psychological side effect on Aegon IV being the last Targaryen to witness a dragon? Oh, interesting. So, I mean, this is the kind of thing you have to think about a bit. I think that this is the kind of, well, there's a couple of layers. Let's take it this. He was, or you look at the Targaryen kings following the loss of the dragons. Aegon the Third just went la 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 la. They're gone. I hate dragons. For most of his reign, he changed his mind a little bit towards the end, but that was it. His son, the next king, Daemon the First, he was like, "I am the dragon. We have no dragons. We cannot invade Dawn. I am the dragon. Look at me. I'm the dragon." That was his response. Baelor was like, "The dragons, that's gone. We're doing a new thing." Aegon, his response seems to have been just, I'll be king. I'll live for now. So maybe, and this is kind of like pushing it psychologically, perhaps, but maybe he simply got to the point of the dragons have gone. They've got my predecessors have tried different things, but they're gone now. So I might as well just enjoy it. That feels like where he got to is like it's not a kind of a coping mechanism. There doesn't seem to be any kind of like, yeah, well, maybe we'll try and get them back. Maybe we'll try and do this. Maybe we'll try and do that. It just seems to be, well, okay, I'm king. I'm the same as any other king anywhere else. I've got no particular right other than the fact that I'm descended from the Targaryens. My father was king before me. I'm just going to enjoy it. So, yeah, I think that is a psychological reason, but I suspect it's more of a let's not overanalyze this. Let's just accept the fact that he saw the dragons and he saw all of the attempts after that to get the dragons back. He saw how they failed. He saw how the Targaryens then were like, "Oh, I am the dragon." He saw how conquering failed. He saw how trying to go all holy failed. And it's just like, well, let's just enjoy it. Let's just be king. Andrew K saying, personally, I think he used Daemon II as a shield while alive. Daemon so liked and respected in place as heir, likely one of the few things holding back rebellion. Yeah, so, I mean, if we are to give him some kind of political understanding, then we can probably say that if he had at any point said, Daemon is my heir, that would definitely have led to civil war, possibly during his own lifetime. And that, I think he must realize, would have not allowed him to live the life he wanted. So, yeah, Andrew, I would agree. This was a political shield. Why he then didn't, if he did think that he wanted Daemon to succeed, he didn't say that at the very end. I don't know. But certainly while he was alive, then this was perfect for him, that he must have known if he said anything to get Daemon to say that Daemon is not the king, then that would have just led to troubles. John Potts saying, maybe Aegon IV had an end of an era feeling from seeing the dragons die and felt he had to eat, drink, and be merry while he had the time. Yeah, I mean, I think a slightly different version of the way that I was saying. I think that this is very much where it depends how much you think it affected him. The kind of fantasy kind of idea, end of an era. This is, we've not got the dragons anymore. Just enjoy life, because who knows how long the Targaryens are going to stay in power. It definitely has that kind of feel to it. Let's go to a question from Andrew Roberts, saying, out of the women he slept with, which one do you think was his favorite? Since Aegon is normally said to be the worst Targaryen king, what was Aegon's tax policy? Alternatively, was he just proclaimed as a terrible king because he didn't seemingly care about when he legitimized his bastards, causing total chaos for 60 odd years? Well, let's let's pick off these. So the last one first. The fact that his decision to legitimize his children led to 5 rebellions definitely soured his reputation in the eyes of his descendants. So I think there's no way around that. History will not have treated him kindly. If after his reign, then Daemon Blackfyre had just choked on a lamprey pie or whatever and just disappeared from history, and Deeron had survived and there hadn't been any Blackfyre rebellions, would she have been viewed quite as badly? Well, he still, I suspect, wouldn't have been viewed well. He probably would have been just viewed as that king who wasn't very good, but not as badly as he is given what happened later. As for his tax policy, which when you're not told, I wish we were. It's one of those things. Economics nerds would love to know this kind of thing. He doesn't seem to have had an interest in it. It's the short answer. The only kind of economicsy thing we're told is that he seemed to use money as king in a very top-down way. He would confiscate stuff from people he didn't like, taking away their lands, taking away their money. He'd give things to people he did like. So this wasn't him encouraging laissez-faire kind of open, free and fair economy. This was him ruling by diktat from above. When he wanted to change the rules, he would just change the rules. So that it's not an economic policy so much as a style of government. In terms of who was his favorite mistress, well, he doesn't seem to have had one. He seems to move on relatively quickly. There are a couple that I would put up there as possibles. Merry Meg was his first. He even had a perhaps joking wedding ceremony with her, and so your first love is often one of the deepest, and so I think perhaps we could say she was. Then the other person I would put up there is Belegier Atheris, who was the Black Pearl of Braavos. And he met her and for 10 years, she was his favorite. Now, that's actually quite a long time in his reign. So he, for almost half of his rule, she was his mistress. Does that mean that she was the one that he loved the most? I mean, no, not necessarily. But certainly she was the one that managed to keep hold of him for the longest, if this is a thing that you want to do, keep hold of him. So I don't think, though, that he loved any of these in a great and passionate way. Carl Kosnak saying Robert is British. Ice is too spicy for his palate. Wow. Not sure where that's come from. But if you're talking about iced tea should be hot. Cracking Console saying, just dropping in to say hi and show my support. Don't really have a question, but when I hear Aegon the Unworthy, I often think of real-life King Ethelred the Unready. Keep up the great work. Yeah, I think, well, this certainly language echoes there, I would say, and thank you very much for the kind words. But Ethelred the Unready is just that he wasn't ready for war as much as anything else. This, we're talking about somebody who was just not worthy of being king because of his moral character. That's the feeling that we get from this. And yeah, again, we get the Henry VIII vibes. Somebody who may have had all of the attributes, but he could not control his own impulses. Let's go to a question from Mara Lee saying, speaking of the Blackfyre rebellions, the king had several bastard children. A few stand out and become famous. I'm thinking of Bloodraven, Charis and Daemon the Blackfyre. Were there any of the other bastard children that also made a name for themselves that may not be as well known? Yeah, so there were a lot of these bastard children, it has to be said. There were 13 of the great bastards who are born of noble women, his mistresses. You've named most of the ones that history most remembers. The other one that I would talk about is Aegon Rivers. Now he was one of the oldest, possibly the oldest of the great bastards, and he was the person who was most supportive of Daemon Blackfyre's reign. And he is a hugely important character because after inciting, effectively, he was, as much as anything, Daemon perhaps wouldn't have even done it if Aegon hadn't been pushing him to it. Then Aegon is the person who survives the Battle of the Red Grass Field, which is the big battle in the first Blackfyre Rebellion, and he escapes back to Essos with the sword Blackfyre. And Aegon had this huge rivalry going on with Bloodraven, but the mystery is what happens to Blackfyre. Because the second Blackfyre Rebellion, which is what we see in the Mystery Knight and Duncan Egg, Aegon didn't back. And we never see Blackfyre, the sword, again. Aegon founds the Golden Company. The Golden Company was, I mean, it's not just a cool band of sellswords over in Essos. This basically, when it started, was the Blackfyre Rebellion provisional army waiting in Essos. All of the people who were exiled because of it, all of the people who still wish to fight for a Blackfyre king, they all went over to Essos and they formed the Golden Company. Aegon Rivers was the head of the Golden Company. So he eventually he dies, but where did the sword go? So he is a hugely important character in all of this. If he had not hung around, probably there wouldn't have been so many Blackfyre rebellions. Probably, definitely, the Golden Company wouldn't have existed. Almost certainly, we would know where the sword Blackfyre was. It would have carried on down the line of Targaryen kings. So he is the fourth of these great bastards that we often talk about. Bloodraven, obviously hugely important. Charis was loved by both of them. Daemon was the great rebeller. So, Diego Goroy saying, Hola, Robert. Hola. Why didn't Aegon IV just end his marriage with Nerys? He wasn't really interested in her, and it looks like he wasn't interested in the children they had either. Was his decision to stay married to her politically motivated? Yeah, this is something that they get into in the World of Ice and Fire. So, having been married to Nerys young and having had a son while they were young, after that, Nerys, she was quite poorly and was basically told that if you have another child, then it may kill you. The same kind of thing echoing what we hear about Elia Martell many, many years later. And she basically goes to her husband. She goes to Aegon and says, you heard what the doctor said. Why don't we just live as brother and wife? And then he rather cruelly sort of comes back, but we are living as brother and wife, as Targaryens do. Very seedy, very cruel. And he continued to demand that whenever he wanted to, then they would sleep together. Eventually, she had another child, who was Daenerys. This was many, many years later. But why didn't he just divorce her or set her aside? He could have done. As I say, the World of Ice and Fire does address this, and it says that he could have done. She would happily have gone and joined the faith, basically, and just said, that's it. I'm not going to marry anyone else. I'm not going to rise up in rebellion against you. I will happily join the faith. I'll go off and live in equivalent of a convent somewhere. It'll be fine. So why didn't he? Well, the World of Ice and Fire concludes cruelty, which is a little bit different to the rest of what we see with Aegon, who seems most of the time just to be wanting to do his own thing. But it does play into this idea that maybe he thought that Diran wasn't his son. Maybe he thought that Nerys had slept with his brother Aemon, but he just couldn't prove it. And maybe he wished to punish Nerys. That feels closest to where we are with this, is that he can't come out and admit the fact that his own brother has fathered his heir. He cannot go and do that. So what he has to do is punish his wife, which is horrible and it's cruel, but that seems the most likely. So, is there any other reasons? It's certainly not because politically he needed her. There's no other real explanation, I think, that kind of fits those facts, to be honest. So, yeah, I'm going to go with it. King of Imps saying, "Hey, Robert, I've often heard Aegon the Unworthy compared to Henry VIII, but with mistresses instead of wives. What are the similarities between the two, and what are the differences?" Well, yeah, so the big similarity is that when both of them were young, they seem to have been this paragon of everything you would want a prince to be. They were great at jousting, they were charismatic, they were good looking, they were tall, they were broad, they were at the center of attention all the time. However, when they became king, they enjoyed eating and they enjoyed women, and they didn't really seem to have much impulse control. So they just got larger and larger and larger physically, and they collected women in the worst possible way. And he, even to the point where both Henry VIII and Aegon IV, they still had a degree of wanting to look good, and so they grew beards. We're told about this with both of them. It's just an interesting little detail. They grew beards because they started getting folds of flesh coming out because they were getting so large, and they thought having a beard would hide all of that. If you ever see any portraits of Henry VIII, then you'll see that obviously he had to approve these portraits, and although they show him as relatively large, they underplay it. They also overplay certain of his other physical attributes, if you ever wish to look in those directions. But this is certainly something which is a connection between the two, is the direction of their rulership. Are they the same? Not really, because Henry VIII, so there's a big difference between having mistresses and having queens. Henry VIII seemed addicted to having a queen, and he was very engaged in the politics of the age. And he also seems to have been quite a good writer. He seems to have been quite a good composer as well. He wrote Green Sleeves, if you know the tune. We don't hear any of this with Aegon IV. He just seems to have just enjoyed eating and time in bed. So yes, there are lots of echoes, but I don't think that they're... as with as is always the case with George R. R. Martin, he doesn't just cut and paste a character from history. He takes inspiration from characters from history. So there are echoes of Henry VIII, but this is not Henry VIII. The other character who's also, incidentally, inspired by Henry VIII, obviously, is Robert Baratheon, and they do have quite similar arcs, Aegon IV and Robert Baratheon. Reflective Rambling, pick up a question for Akatosh Ray, thank you very much, saying, why didn't the Great Bastards try to establish themselves in Essos? They had power to start something, they just always rush over to Westeros. So if you're talking about Daemon and Aegor, why didn't they, and their descendants, why didn't they try just to set up a realm in Essos? I think it's simply that Daemon thought that he was the king of the Seven Kingdoms, the rightful king of the Seven Kingdoms, or he had been persuaded that he was the rightful king of the Seven Kingdoms. So he was going to invade there, because that was where he was the ruler of. And it's the same thing when you read Dany's chapters. She goes through this actually in Meereen. You read them, her brain process just goes, she goes, well, I could just stay here. I could just be queen here. I could rule over this land. Why do I have to go over to West? But over time, she comes at the end of the book, she comes to this point of, no, I am a Targaryen. I am going to invade. I am going to take what is mine by fire and blood. And Daemon, we often don't, because he's got a different surname, Daemon Blackfyre, we don't think of him as being a Targaryen, but he is. And so if you think of that same kind of thought process that Daenerys has, and then just put it onto him, it makes absolute sense. He will take what is his by fire and blood. You can just imagine that he's there going, right, that's it. I'm gonna have these Seven Kingdoms. They're gonna be mine. Ditto Aegor Rivers. Akatosh Ray saying maybe a monocle would work for Robert instead of having to take on off his glasses. Maybe it is. Maybe I will investigate a monocle. Vladimir Kozak saying, Robert, apologies for the off-topic question, but how much milk do you need to wash back the heat of a capsicum bell pepper? I don't know, but if you ever do drink spicy food or eat spicy food, then milk, or I personally recommend mango lassi as if you have a spicy food. But yes, milk or yogurt works very well. Let's go to a question from Maura Lee saying there was a rumor going around some fans that Shira Seastar is Quaithe in disguise. What is your take? Do you agree? Would you like to know any? I would like to know any information that is available on her story. Well, I would love to know all information about Quaithe. She is a fascinating character. So we don't get huge amounts about her. This is one of the things which is very frustrating about the second half of the Targaryen rulers, because unlike Fire and Blood Part 1, the first 130 odd years, we do know a lot about those characters. The second lot, we know a lot less about them, and the supporting characters more than we know about characters like Aegon IV. We know about characters like Aegon V. We will know increasingly more, but the supporting cast like Shira Seastar, we don't know. So her mother, she is another one of these great bastards. Her mother was the last of the Nine Mistresses. And people even wondered how was it that she could even stand to be close to him, because she wasn't a noble lady of the Seven Kingdoms. It wasn't that she had to, because this was her king. She came over from Lys. And her mother, Shira Seastar's mother, was allegedly a magic user. Now, Shira Seastar was born and grew into a great beauty and also allegedly a great magic user herself. Now, what do we know? Well, we know that she and Bloodraven became lovers, but Bloodraven wanted a again and again he wanted to marry her, and she kept on saying no. There was a bit of a love triangle there going with Aegon Rivers, at least in their minds. And then what happens is she disappears. She disappears off of the page, and we simply do not know. Now, my guess, which is if you put a bit of tinfoil for this one, I think it probably works. But this is something which I've recently had a slightly aha moment about. Was reading about Aegon the Fifth. So this is Egg when he grows up. He tries to learn about how to hatch dragon eggs, and it said that he sent for magic users from Ashai. Now, in order for that to be the case, he had to send someone to Ashai. So who is he going to send? Now, again, I don't have any information other than this, but if I were him, I would look around my court and go, well, Shira Seastar is magic-y, and she comes from Essos. Maybe I should send her. So that makes sense to me that she was the person who was sent off to Ashai to try and bring people back to help with the hatching dragon eggs. And that fits in with the fact that she disappears from the narrative completely. We don't know what happens to her after that. We just weren't told that she was the one who was sent. And then maybe she does not return. So if she does not return from Ashai, why not? Because she's learning more magic, perhaps. And maybe she learns how to live a long life. Lots of people from Ashai seem to do that. Melisandre seems to be living a long life. Certainly her ex-partner Bloodraven up north of the Wall learned how to live a long life. So it would work as an echo if she got a long life and then emerged as a magic user from Ashai with a lacquered mask on, as magic users from Ashai do. And how does this fit in with this idea she might be Quaithe? Because maybe she came as far across as Karth, and she speaks the common tongue to Daenerys as if she was born to it. She seems to speak it very naturally, which makes you go, well, hang on, I thought she was from Ashai. Perhaps she was from somewhere else before that. And then you have to ask, what is it that Quaithe is trying to do? It's all about motivations. When you're trying to get into understanding who a character is, a lot of a mysterious character, a lot of it is trying to work out, well, what are they trying to achieve? What are they trying to do? And if you look at what Quaithe is trying to do, is again and again and again, she's trying to help Daenerys, and she's trying to make Daenerys become more Targaryen-y and invade Westeros. That's what she's about. Don't trust anyone else. Don't trust the perfect seneschal, etc., etc., etc. Remember who you are. The dragons know. Do you? These are the kinds of things she says to her, and the imagery around her is stars, which fits with Shira Seastar. So, yeah, I absolutely subscribe to this idea. I think I did a video on this ages ago. It may well be one I will redo. I'm quite enjoying. I'm going through redoing my Faceless Men videos, which I did 5 years ago, I think it is. Going back over them, some things have been changing, some things I've been keeping the same, but just redoing some old videos. So Quaithe is one that I've been thinking maybe I will redo that, and just sort of add in a few extra layers to my understanding of where she is. But yeah, so that's it. We officially, she disappears off the page. Unofficially, I suspect she went east. She went to Essos, probably to Ashai, and probably she's then reappears as Quaithe. Which, incidentally, adds a whole extra echoing layer, a sort of a balance to the fact that we have Bloodraven on Westeros, who has stayed on Westeros. He has decided Jon Snow is his champion. Jon Snow is the prince that was promised. Jon Snow is Azor Ahai reborn. He's the one who's going to be leading the fight against the others. If Shira Seastar is over in Essos, and she is also looking for this hero who's going to save them, and she picks on Daenerys and says, Daenerys, there's the prince that was promised. Daenerys is the Azor Ahai reborn. That adds a real echo and parallel and tension about these two star-crossed lovers, pun intended, from so long ago, who had shared vision for what they wanted to do, and then go to different continents and get a different champion. That would be absolutely amazing if they at some point realize. Samuel Sabo saying, "Hey Robert, regarding the bastards of Aegon, is there any estimate about how many he had? He must have had more than just the great ones." Well, we're not told. We're told of 13 definitely, plus the 3 from White Walls allegedly, plus there's I've forgotten his name, Plum, who Ossifer Plum, I think it is, who allegedly was also his child. He apparently claimed to have slept with upwards of 900 women. Maybe that was a brag, given what we're told about him. It sounds not as if it might not have been a brag. If so, yeah, probably there were a lot more, but we don't know. The point here, though, I think the bigger point here is that we often think of Valyrian or Targaryen heritage as being this rare thing in Westeros, but in reality, lots of people had some hint of it. Here alone, Aegon IV, there's some of these great bastards just disappear off the pages of history. We've no idea what happens to them anymore. They could have had children, and those children could have had children, and so by the time we get to A Song of Ice and Fire, then just 2 or 3 generations past, somebody could have Targaryen ancestry. That's entirely possible. It's when you get Quentin Martell. Quentin Martell goes over to Meereen feeling confident about taming a dragon because he has Targaryen ancestry 3 generations earlier. There will be other people who had Targaryen ancestry 3 generations earlier. It's just not officially. So it's worth saying, I think, that when Aegon legitimized his bastards, he did legitimize all of them, but it only really mattered for the noble-born children, because they were the ones that everybody knew about. All of the random other women that he had, and he seems to have had quite varied taste as far as we can tell. If they had bastard children from him, then them being legitimized didn't really mean anything at all, particularly given the fact that they were legitimized just as the old king was dying. So it's not as if they could even get anything out of it. Was Deer unlikely to be giving out gifts to all of these potential other claimants? I don't think so. Let's go with a question from... Oh, actually, I've got 2 more questions from my patrons. So now's a good time to drop some more questions into my into the chat. If you're watching this live, I'll try and pick up as many of them as possible. Callie Summers saying, if Shira is Quaithe and was in a shy, could she have met Alyssa Farman? Could that be a connection with Dany getting the eggs? Wow, that's another great connection. So Alyssa Farman was generation earlier, 2 generations earlier, in fact. Now, she did. This is in Fire and Blood Part 1. She got a ship. There's a whole story to this, but she got a ship from Braavos, having stolen 3 dragon eggs. She went to Braavos, sold the dragon eggs to the Sea Lord, got a ship which was good enough to sail her around the world. She got into the ship, she headed off west, and was never seen from again. However, Corlys Velaryon, who visited Asshai, claims that he saw her ship there. Was it her? Very probably. It's the kind of thing that George R. R. Martin, I'm sure he's not going to ever confirm it fully, but Planetos is a planet. It is round. If you keep on going west, eventually you will reach the east. So it's entirely possible that she ended up there in Asshai. And could Shiras Seastar have met her? Well, Shiras Seastar was, as I say, she was generations after this, a couple of generations after this. So it's possible, but unlikely would be what I would say. And in terms of the eggs, they almost certainly they were in Braavos and kept by Braavos, because at the time they were thought that it was thought maybe they might hatch. This was a cause of great consternation. The Jaehaerys heard about this, and he sent his best man, Septembath, over to negotiate about this. And basically, the Sea Lord of Braavos would not give them up, but they negotiated a price. And Septembath left basically with a sort of a threat. The Sea Lord gave as good as he could get. He basically said, "You threaten me, I've got faceless men, I can threaten you back." But he basically left with a threat, and he said, "Okay, we'll pretend you've not got these, but if we hear just one hint, any hint that one of these dragon eggs has hatched, then we're coming at you. We're coming at you with all the dragons we've got." The Targaryens did not want any other dragons in anyone else's hands. They had a monopoly on dragons, and that was perfect for them. So, long story short, the eggs didn't hatch, and time went by, and the dragons died out in Westeros, and the Sea Lords of Braavos will have concluded at some point, 150 years later, they will have concluded, actually, you know what? These are now valuable, but they're no longer valuable as potential future dragons. This isn't a thing which is suddenly going to happen. They've turned to stone. And when someone with huge amounts of money comes along and says, "Can I buy those?" They would have gone, "Fine, yeah." So that seems to have been where they are. Yes, I know he says they came from the Shadowlands. That seems to have been either him trying to make up a cool-sounding story, or more likely and realistically, just George R. R. Martin. This was a first draft, and he didn't, at that time, he didn't think about Alyssa Farman. He hadn't made all the connections, and it was just, he says they come from the Shadowlands. When he first started writing, his idea was that Dany was literally going to be going over to Asshai, so that part of the world was going to have a lot bigger part of the plot. But then he reined that back in. Charis Ballerina, do you think, saying 3 questions, do you think Daemon is legitimate? So if he's not, then it's because Aemon, the Dragon Knight, and Nerys got together. Now, I mean, instinct says probably that happened. However, that could never be proven, because the moment it could be proven, then I think that would have been it. However, this kind of really awkward but still strong family bond existed there. Aemon died protecting Aegon from effectively an assassin's attack. That's how strong that bond still was. Aegon never said a bad thing to. I mean, yes, he might have muttered away behind closed doors, but he didn't sort of get Aemon and sort of publicly shame him or anything. So there was still some kind of bond going on there. It's entirely possible that maybe they slept together and then there was a marriage and then they had the child and it was like, oh, was that me? Who knows? Something along those lines. So quite possibly, but I don't think we've got the evidence one way or the other to say categorically. Did Aegon ever do anything good in his reign? I mean, it's sort of a hard question. It's one of those things that you... he did reign for a reasonable period of time. And during that time, there weren't any major uprisings. There weren't any big problems. The story of his time was him. And one can only assume that he must have had other people somehow, much as what we've been saying about the Hand of the King, which seemed to have been just like given out to somebody who pleased him. He must have had people who are running things behind the scenes. He must have had some kind of personal charm to keep people on side. So did he proactively do anything? We don't read of anything that he proactively did that was good. But at the same time, the kingdom survived. The regime survived right up to the point of his death. And frankly, it was even robust enough. As much as we talk about the Blackfyre Rebellion, the Blackfyre Rebellions got less and less impressive the further on they went. And yes, they might have divided the kingdom, but it wasn't as bad by any stretch of the imagination as the Dance of the Dragons. So, I mean, is this to his credit? I mean, not really. I'm clearly scrabbling around for something here, but he didn't make the situation worse during his time while he was reigning. It's probably about as good as I can get on that one. Does Jon, this is Jon Snow, loving the Dragon Knight, hint that his name is Aemon? Oh, interesting question. I'm not sure. So to bring everyone back to a debate that was had 5 years ago, was it? Whenever it was that we had the reveal on the TV show that Jon was called Aegon. There was a big debate amongst the A Song of Ice and Fire community about what Jon Snow's real name would be. And this is because he was born, obviously, from Rhaegar and Lyanna, and Rhaegar presumably would have named him. And what name would he have given him? Now, I'll come back to the Aemon thing in just 1 second. I just want to give the context first. The context is that we know that Rhaegar was wanting to replicate the original Targaryen three, the three heads of the dragon. His first two children, Aegon, Rhaenys, his third, he will have been expecting a daughter that he was going to call Visenya. I'm pretty convinced of that. That was what he was expecting. However, he wasn't there for the birth, and he died. Basically, he wasn't around at all. So if we try and just get back to that moment in time, he will probably have had a conversation with the pregnant Lyanna to say something like, "I'll be back soon, but this child is going to be a girl, and we're going to call it Visenya." And then he went off. The child was born, uh, or just before that, they will have heard that he died. And both of his children died as well, crucially. Aegon and the Rhaenys were cruelly battered to death by the Lannisters, and Rhaegar himself had been killed. So Lyanna then has this child. I'm sure if it had been a girl, then she would have stuck to Visenya, what Rhaegar's wish had been. However, this was a boy. So what does she do? She is now in charge of naming this child. There's no input here from Rhaegar. Now, who does she name this after? She wants some name which will honor Rhaegar and his two children, perhaps already. Particularly if she's brought into this idea that Rhaegar's son is somehow mysteriously going to be the prince that was promised, and then okay, now this is Rhaegar's only son. So that's where the logic goes to name this child Aegon, because she's actually naming it after a child who had been brutally murdered just a few weeks earlier, and that works for me as a story. Might she have called the child Aemon? She could. It was a well-known Targaryen name, but I think, as you say, the only thing which kind of works with that is the way that, yes, he does really like Aemon the Dragon Knight. He also really likes Daemon, incidentally, and then there's obviously the connection in with Aemon at the wall. So if I had to guess, I would still say that Jon Snow's birth name, which obviously his adoptive father Ned then had to change because he couldn't go around with a new baby with a very Targaryen sounding name, but his birth name, it does make sense to me that it was Aegon. Let's go to George R. R. Tolkien saying, "Salutations, Robert. Salutations to you too, sir. Do you think that Aegon knew of the Song of Ice and Fire prophecy, or was he just sleeping with everyone because he felt like it?" So this is well, the second part of your question, actually, just to quickly say, you wanted to know about Daenerys, his daughter, how that turned out. Well, she then married into the Dornish family and was very happy. So she apparently was in love, allegedly was in love with Daemon Blackfyre, but was married on a political point off to the Dornish to bring the Dornish into the Seven Kingdoms. That worked. Daemon brought them into the Seven Kingdoms. She then went down to Sunspear, and her husband built the water gardens for her there, and she seems to have lived a very happy life after that. So that's, in George R. R. Martin terms, quite a happy ending and a happy someone. You were asking about whether Aegon knew of the Song of Ice and Fire, and this is Targaryen rulers. At which point? Charis clearly doesn't know about it. Rhaegar seems to have rediscovered it, which seems to imply that he hadn't had it handed down to him. But where did it get lost? When we were talking about Baelor, we came to the conclusion that that is the most likely place. The first possible place is the Dance of the Dragons itself. Maybe somewhere along those lines. Rhaenyra obviously died, Daemon obviously died, and then their heirs kept on dying. Maybe at some point they just didn't manage to pass it on to the next heir. So that's the first possible place. The second possible place is Baelor. Baelor just did not pass it. It came down to him, and he just did not pass it on because he liked burning books that were all about magic-y stuff and prophecy and things that were not to do with the Faith of the Seven. So whereas you can look at someone like Daemon the First and say, there's someone who seems to be following what this prophecy would have him do, what the Song of Ice and Fire would have him to do, which is bring dawn in. Is there any evidence that Aegon was also doing that? Well, not with any great vigor. He did. There was a time when he was thinking about invading Dawn, but that seemed, as much as anything, to be just to annoy his relatives. When he builds his fleets, which gets destroyed, he builds his steampunk dragons. If you weren't here for earlier bit of the live stream, feel free to skip back if you missed what that was about. But he built steampunk dragons, and they got destroyed. And then he went, oh, well, not to worry. And then just went back to doing what he was doing before. So there was no kind of drive or vigor to any of this. Yes, he kept the Seven Kingdoms as they were. And he handed it on. But he wasn't stupid. He will know that legitimizing his children, he will know that passing the sword Blackfyre on to Daemon potentially led to future conflict, and if he was bought into the Song of Ice and Fire, then that doesn't make sense. So he's the first king that you look at and go, there's no real hint here that he did know about it. So if I had to guess, it got lost before it got to him. Maybe he did know about it, but he just didn't take it very seriously. Okay, let's go to oh yes, people talking about the Bloodraven shirt. So I will show this one again in case you missed this earlier in the stream. So here we go. When in doubt, blame Bloodraven. Wonderful artwork from San Rixian, who's an astonishing artist of the Song of Ice and Fire community, has been for a long time. Wonderfully talented, as you can see. If you want this shirt, then you can buy it from my my merch shop. There's a link down in the description to Spreadshirt. Or if you're already a patron, as a thank you to my patrons, if you're $10 or more patron, then I will happily send you one of these for free. Just give me your details and I will put it in the post. Or if you don't want a shirt and you want a mug or bookmark or something else with it, then let me know. We can sort that one out. But that's just as a thank you to you. Similarly, mods, let me know. I would love to send you a shirt as well. And if you're not a patron and would like it, the most cost-effective way to get it is just to become a patron. So if you'd like to do that, there's a link down in the description. I think this is a great shirt. I mean, I know this is my merch, but I'm loving the artwork. So if you want to get your hands on it, then patreon.com/Deep Geek. There's a link if you're watching live, which will be appearing in the chat, I'm sure, or check out the link down there. I've got another question from last question from my patrons, and this is from Travis saying, "Hello, Robert. A quick Lord of the Rings digression. Are you familiar with Magic the Gathering trading card game? They just released a new set based on the Lord of the Rings novels. I am fascinated by how the stories in general, but Lord of the Rings specifically is adapted into various media. In my opinion, they did a fantastic job here. They captured all the story beats you would expect, but also managed to get in some really deep cuts as well." So I have heard about this. I've not got my hands. I'm going to try and get my hands on a set. As and when I do, I will let you know what I think about it. But yeah, I have played many years ago. I used to play Magic. It's a great game. I'm aware the Wizards of the Coast are perhaps not in the highest of regard with our Dungeons and Dragons aficionados among us. But yeah, so everything I've heard about that particular set is good. Let's go to the chat. We'll pick up a few more questions in the chat. Wheezy Squeezebox saying Steampunk Dragons. I missed that. Yeah, maybe I'm slightly overstating it, but that's how I imagine them. Aegon Dragonborn saying, "Hi Robert, would you call Aegon IV mentally unstable, or just an impulsive man who was painted in such a bad light because he was in a position of power, so his decisions affected everyone?" I mean, more towards the latter, I would say. He's most of what he does doesn't come across as cruel or even something you can't really understand. He seems to just lack a lot of impulse control. He grew up privileged, and perhaps no one ever said no to him. One thing I didn't mention, which perhaps I should have done, which perhaps plays into his psychological makeup. His mother, Lara Roger, she came across with Viserys. You'll remember this from just after the Dance of the Dragons. She came across as this is part of the Lycian Spring, and she came across. She was married to Viserys. She had children with him, but then everything went wrong for the Roger family, and she basically never really settled in King's Landing, and she went home. She had her children, and then she just said, "Right, bye then," and headed off back to Lys. So young Aegon here was left, and his two siblings left at a very young age. I think 6 off the top of my head. Their mother just abandoned them. Now, what impact will that have had on them? Particularly as their father was increasingly, and for most of the rest of his life, then was hand of the king and very focused on basically was running the kingdom. Their father, Aegon's father, was not around. So they didn't have that kind of ongoing parenting. And so Aegon will have grown up with huge privilege, but perhaps not with much parental guidance. Now, that's definitely something which kind of plays into who he is as a person. And this, I mean, if you kind of try and follow the psychology even further, you get to the point you say, well, maybe nobody ever said no to him. And so he just thought he could have whatever he wanted. And then he became king, and it turned out he could just have whatever he wanted. So he just kept on getting whatever he wanted. So that just seems to me the most logical way, rather than trying to look and say, well, maybe he had some psychological issues here or there. I think it's just that nobody ever said no to him. Questions from Andrew K saying, do you think, given how Aegon IV resented the love and respect the Dragon Knight received, played into his decision to stay the course with Nerys to torture him a bit? Yeah, it's possible. So the only place where we get this idea of him being cruel in any way is with his family, is with Nerys, who what the World of Ice and Fire says, that he stayed married to her out of cruelty, and if he knew that him and his brother, that her and his brother were in love, and if he knew that actually his heir, probably, but he couldn't prove it, was Aemon's son, then yeah, maybe that's what he did. And was he resenting the love and respect that Dragon Knight? The Dragon Knight did get love and respect, and he was kind of a great knight. You hear the stories. He had a bit of a cameo actually with Baelor last time, if you remember. He was the one who he was captured in that cage above all of those snakes. If you remember, when Baelor then sort of went and walked through the snakes, legend was that they all sort of bowed to him. In reality, they didn't. They bit they bit him. He was dying. And then Aemon dragged him up into the cage, unlocked the cage, put him over his shoulder, jumped out from the cage over the snake pit, and then walked with him, carrying Baelor over his shoulder all the way to the nearest friendly castle. Many days walk away. He was a bit of a legend. And yeah, might Aemon have been jealous? Perhaps, but we're not really told about jealousy. I think it's just interpersonal stuff, if I had to guess. Reflective Rambling saying, speaking of Lord of the Rings updates, in case you missed it, Amazon has submitted Owain, Ismail, Sophia, and Morfith for Emmy nods. I did not know that. One thing in terms of, well, good luck to them. One thing in terms of Rings of Power update, they have finished filming it. Season 2 this is, so expect that. I mean, I heard a rumor of early next year, which sounds about right, but they've not confirmed anything yet. But other things just to be aware of TV wise today, Black Mirror season 6 has dropped. I'm a massive fan of Black Mirror, so that's what I'm going to be watching this week. In just over 2 weeks' time, we're going to have the first part of The Witcher season 3. They've split The Witcher season 3 into 2 halves, and episodes 1 to 4 in the first half is going to be released later this month. Episodes 5 to 8 will be released towards the end of July. Wheel of Time season 2, they've finally given us a release date, which I think is September. And the other thing to talk about is House of the Dragon. They have started filming. Writer strike or no writer strike, they think they've got good scripts and they're just going with what they've got. So that started a month or so ago. So last I heard, that was going to take 10 months. So expect to see it maybe summer or autumn of next year. Let's have a quick flick through. Reflective Rambling saying, so you're saying that maybe instead of surprise, Robert stream for my next surprise Robert stream for my next birthday, I'll get Rings of Power. I would accept this compromise and release you from your tic-tac-toe obligation. Well, you're welcome. If it's within my power for you to have the Rings of Power on your birthday, I will. It's clearly not about. Okay, Kaziglu Bay saying my son is planning to spend way too much money on the Lord of the Rings Magic the Gathering series. I entirely approve. Excellent. Andrew K saying that he thinks that Aegon IV did resent Aemon. Aemon was widely loved and even died saving Aegon's life, and supposedly Aegon IV didn't honor his death at all. Absolutely. Dagon Tranos saying, would you like to share with us any plans for future videos? Yeah, I'm going to finish off my series, The Faceless Men. I'm going to add in an extra I didn't do because I'm redoing them, but updating them as I'm redoing them. But I'm going to add in another surprise video into that as well, just to keep it fresh. In terms of Lord of the Rings, I've got one coming out soon, which is Tolkien's other books. If you've ever wondered outside of the Legendarium, we're not just talking about the Silmarillion or Unfinished Tales and things like that. What about the non Lord of the things, Legendarium things that he wrote, because he did write quite a lot of other stuff. I've got a video about that, and I suspect I'll do something about The Witcher as well when it comes out. Okay, I think with that, let's talk about two things first. First of all, a reminder again, if you want to get your hands on this beautiful shirt, the best way to do that is to, if you are a patron, just message me there on Patreon and send me details, and I'll get one sent out to you. If you are not, the cheapest and best way to do that is just join a $10 patron, and we will send one out to you. As long as it's there by the end of the month, then I can do that. That's just another way of me saying thank you to my patrons, because you are amazing. And also moderators, thank you. If you're there in the chat, please say thank you to the moderators who do a fantastic job. But yeah, mods, if you want one, just let me know details, what size, where to send it. We will do there. Stephanie No Name saying, can you do more book live streams, please? If you're talking about things like what I did with Aziz a week or two ago, looking at Clash of Kings, yeah, I will do that when I've now started my listen through on Storm of Swords, which actually, do you want complete? If you've got this far in, you're geeky enough to I hope appreciate just a random thought which I had just reading listening to the prologue to Storm of Swords, and in that, for those, if it's been a while for you, then that's fine. That's done from, this is north of the wall. The great ranging has gone up. It's the Fist of the First Men, and we got from the POV, basically from the perspective of Chet, one of the people leading what was going to be a coup attempt against Lord Mormont. Now, that doesn't happen for a variety of reasons, but as an entirely random thing, and I don't know what I'm going to do with this information, this thought. Maybe I'll follow it down, maybe I'll just leave it as it is. But there's a character there called Small Paul, who we don't really hear about before this, but he appears a few times in this book. He is given the ironic name Small Paul because he's not small. He's tall, he's big, he's massive, he's the strongest person on the wall. Now, one phrase really struck me in that prologue, was Small Paul, thick as a castle wall. Now, I had never noticed that before when I was reading it, but maybe it was just hearing it. Thick as a castle wall, where have I heard that for? But obviously we know where we've heard that before. That's from Dunk, from the Tales of Dunk and Egg. He keeps on saying, this is what he always says to himself, what Sir Arlen had said to him: Dunk the Lunk, thick as a castle wall. Small Paul, big as a castle wall. So is George R. R. Martin trying to tell us something with that? Is this possibly another one of Dunk's descendants that we find on the wall? I mean, I suspect it doesn't make a huge amount of difference. And book spoilers here, just so you know, but he doesn't last long, Paul. He does get a great interest in Lord Mormont's Raven, who almost certainly is Blood Raven, walking into it, which would add another kind of hint to the Dunk imagery, because clearly Dunk has dealings with Blood Raven. And then we get Small Paul at the end, who in dying saves the life of Sam. And almost certainly Dunk, in dying, will save the life of people at Summerhall. So is this just some weird small nod that George R. R. Martin has included here in the prologue to Storm of Swords to Duncan the Tall? I don't know. I haven't investigated it any further. I was literally listening to that on my dog walk this morning, and it went, oh, okay, that's interesting. So yeah, if you've got any further thoughts on that, feel free to tweet me. Maybe I'll pursue that, maybe not. But that was a bit of a digression. So I apologize, I have no idea how I got into that one. Book live streams, that was it. So yes, when I get to the end of the Storm of Swords, I will definitely do another one. And I like the idea of doing maybe not so many live streams and maybe some pre-recorded conversations with people going through at a more granular level on some of these books. So that's an idea I've had on this channel, IDG Live. I think that gives a lot more sort of scope for that kind of thing. So yes, I will be, but not straight away. Okay, think that's. Oh, we got another question from Martin S. saying, "Hi, Robert. Been listening to the live stream rather passively tonight. Absolutely not a problem at all. Do you think there will ever be a Silmarillion show?" Well, interesting question. So, the rights, Tolkien rights. I did try and I did a short video. I think it's on this channel, actually. Definitely put it up on TikTok about where the Tolkien rights are at the moment, but it's quite complicated. But the short version is that J.R.R. Tolkien never sold the rights to the Silmarillion. He never wrote the Silmarillion while he was alive. It was not published during his lifetime, and he obviously wrote the stuff that became the Silmarillion, but it was Christopher Tolkien who pulled it together into the form that we know today. And the rights to that have never been sold by the Tolkien estate, which is why we've never seen a Silmarillion adaptation. The closest we've got is I hesitate to say it, but Rings of Power is probably the closest we've got, because this is the one which the first time we've had something which is based in the period of the Silmarillion, back in the Second Age, but that is using the rights that are in the appendices to the Lord of the Rings. As I say, this gets quite nuanced quite quickly. The appendices to the Lord of the Rings are effectively what Tolkien did when he got told he was not allowed to publish the Silmarillion, because who on earth is going to read that? And then he said, well, can I just condense it and put it as an appendix to the Lord of the Rings? And the publishers went, yeah, right. So that is those are the rights on which the Rings of Power is based. Are we ever going to see a full Silmarillion series? It spans such a huge scope. My take is probably not. We will just get bits and pieces. I could certainly see the potential. Tolkien rights, anyone who's ever looked at copyright law will be very aware that these things, they change. They're different in different countries. There are often different sort of nuances. Companies often try and negotiate. Disney did a deal to keep things going for their things, but in the UK, it is 70 years after the death of the author. That's the general rule. And Tolkien died in 1973, which means that if you add 70 years onto that, you'll go, well, okay, we've got 20 more years left before probably the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit then become public domain. What about the Silmarillion? Yes, that's his stuff, but then that's Christopher Tolkien as well as editor. When does that come out? We don't know. But it's not beyond the realms of possibility that the Tolkien estate may decide to cash in while they still definitely do have the rights for these things. Not, I suspect, for here's the Silmarillion overview, Maura, here's some stories from within it. Maybe they could do a Children of Húrin or something along those lines. Yeah. So I don't think we're going to have an overall Silmarillion show, but we might have stories from the Silmarillion at some point. Right. The Melonheads here. Somebody said Melonheads. If they're in the chat, hi there, guys. If you are. Right. Okay. So with that, I think what I will do is point at my screen to say, if you would like to watch more of these live streams, there is a link appearing later up around here to some more live streams. There is a link appearing somewhere around here to Patreon, which is the best way to support this channel. Also, get a hold of that marvelous t-shirt. If you wish to join Patreon at the $10 or more level, then you will get, I will happily send that out to you by the end of this month, so by the end of June. And with that, I think I will be back next week, and let's look at Diran II. I think we'll look at next week, and then maybe we'll take a little digression over and look at Daemon Blackfyre. So till then, take care, everyone. Fantastic. Love and thanks to the mods. Thank you so much to my patrons. If you're just watching, I hope you enjoyed it. Take care, everyone, and I'll see you again next time.